Hi, you're listening to Defend Your Time, brought to you by Continue. This is the podcast where we help you get stronger security, better value, and fewer headaches out of your Microsoft security investments. And today, we're going to be talking all about bridging the technical and leadership gap for IT and security leaders. How can you develop not just in your technical capacity, but as your capacity as a business leader? I'm joined today by Gavriella Schuster and Gareth Lindahl-Wise. Gavriella has spent 25 years at Microsoft. You've been in high tech for 30 years. You sit on the boards of Continue, Nerdio, and Mimecast, and your podcast, The Big Idea, examines how technology and society are driving transformation in high tech. Thank you, Gavriella, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Gareth, CISO at Continue, you've been in security for 20 years, and you actively mentor rising and ICT security leaders day in and day out, particularly those who have come up through more of a technical than a business background. So thank you, Gareth, for being here today.
Thanks for the invitation.
So it should be a great discussion. And Gavriella, I'll turn it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you. So Gareth, I thought maybe we could start with just how has your role as the Chief Information Security Officer evolved over time?
Great question. I think the early days, it was 99% security focused in trying to look at the risks that an organization has primarily from a security perspective. But over time, I've seen the role with peers and with myself change into being a role that better understands what the business strategy is trying to do and achieve, and then understanding how security can help some of those objectives and really drive the business on. So not being the kind of reactive security cost center of old time. And historically, I've seen the more mature growth in CISO roles probably mirror organizations that have had a growth in the CIO role. So where the CIO has moved from just, in inverted commas, being the person looking after IT to being genuinely the chief information officer. So I think organizations where they've made that move, often you see the requirement from a CISO to follow that, again, being somebody who supports a business strategy, a business change and business objectives, as opposed to being effectively a security manager.
It's super important because the role of security in an organization has changed dramatically over time, right? It has become so much more necessary with all of the potential vulnerabilities and hackers and the privacy of data and the way data goes out and about all over the organization. But then to bridge that back to not just following the data and following the network, but also looking at what are the business objectives and how are people in the business actually interacting with each other and interacting with their customers. That has a lot to do with what you need to do within the organization, right?
Oh, absolutely. There's so much advantage for yourself as a CISO and also for your organization if you are in discussions at the right time, where you can be proactive, where you can shape things, inform things, direct things. A CISO is never going to come up with a marketing strategy, but they will have some good insights into a route that may be quicker or easier or less fraught with risk. So it's that sort of insight that I think I've been noting in terms of the change of what I see really successful CISOs doing. They're having those discussions really early within their leadership groups, within the boards of organizations. And there's no doubt that the CISO still needs to do the kind of inverted commas again, the day job, because somebody has to do it and it's your responsibility. But you need to make sure that you're ahead of the organizational change and requirements and opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. A while back, I had done an interview with Alyssa Miller, who's the CISO at Epic. And she had previously actually had a role called a business information security officer. And her role in that was to actually sit in the business and be in all of those meetings and discussions, and then kind of bridge that with the CISO of the organization. So where an organization doesn't have the luxury of having somebody who's able to free up their time to be in all of those business meetings and have a separate CISO, how do you allocate your time? How do you, it feels like you'd have to be everywhere.
You do. I think it's always a case of you free yourself up where you're comfortable that areas of responsibilities are in safe hands. Going into new CISO roles, I've always very quickly assessed what the capabilities are in different areas and had that sense of where do I need to worry? Where do I need to put my attention? Where do I need to support? And you're absolutely right to take that CISO type approach. A CISO is definitely going to need to make time, make space to do it. And there are different ways of doing it. I think there's obviously a role for external parties to help there, potentially looking at MSSPs, but they only give you space and time if you're confident enough that you're not always looking over your shoulder. If you want to have that ability to be strategic, to really engage, to commit and be consistent, you've got to have that confidence that any third party you're dealing with is not going to drop the ball. Because as a CISO, I know that any third party I bring to an organization, they're trading on my reputation and my ability to work within the organization. So that's the sort of key thing, that if you've done your selection, you should have a partner that does what you need and gives you the indication, the metrics and everything that you might want to satisfy yourself that, yeah, okay, they've got this covered. It's not that I don't care. It's not that I don't look, but I'm confident and I'm seeing data coming out to say that it's still okay.
Yeah. So it's a combination, then, just to paraphrase what you're saying, it's a combination of finding maybe third-party partnerships that can supplement the capabilities that you have within your organization so that you can just oversee them versus actually execute and operationalize them. And the education that you do within your organization so that you have champions who understand the value of security and know what they should be listening for and looking at so that you don't have to be everywhere. And then shoring up the capabilities within your own organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the key things you can do is get people thinking in the right way from your perspective as a CISO or a BISO. It's far more effective for me to influence people into considering risks in their areas of responsibilities, thinking about them, looking at options, and then potentially coming back to say, hey, we want to do this. This is what we see as a potential risk. Here are some options. What do you think? That's a force multiplier. If you can get your organization working like that, fantastic. Obviously, you're providing expertise and they expect that from you. But if you've got a switch where people are thinking of what's the right way to do it, deluge of requests for assessments and reviews, etc., goes away. You get a faster return for the business in terms of initiatives working and moving. And also you've freed yourself up. You've got that magical time to then try and be genuinely strategic.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've listed some of those challenges that a CISO will face in their career. What are there other ones that you would call out of challenges you faced in your career or that you see other CISOs kind of facing?
I think one of the more common ones almost comes down to background and career background. Typically, I see CISOs that have come from more technical backgrounds are great in their areas of responsibilities, rock solid, can articulate security risk brilliantly. Where I think the security industry underserves itself is by helping some of these people with some of the softer skills, the influencing skills that other roles in an organization almost naturally have. If you think of IT directors, IT leaders, marketing leaders, finance leaders, pretty much across the board, in their careers, they have got that experience and exposure of how to influence people, how to make a pitch, how to deliver, how to manage stakeholders properly. It's implicit, implied within their roles, and they've been doing it for years. Where sometimes you see CISOs coming up through technical roles, they've never been exposed to that. And I see that as probably one of the great challenges. And lots of people talk about the language gap or the understanding gap between CISOs and boards. And I think sometimes it's the fact that we haven't developed these people well enough to be able to communicate in a different way that makes sense and resonates with the business. Sorry,
Yeah.
that was a very long answer to your question.
No, that makes a lot of sense. It's people they've grown up into the role of a CISO because of their technical capability, but now they find themselves in a leadership position where they need to be functioning across the organization, functioning with the executive team, functioning with the board, and they haven't learned how to communicate in a way that is non-technical, right? How to translate what they have identified as the challenges or the areas that need investment in a way that can engage the leadership. How does one make that transition?
So there's an element of organizational responsibility and personal responsibility. I would suggest as an organizational responsibility, we need to make opportunities open to people coming into these roles where they do get exposure to how you manage through influence as opposed to having direct control. And from the personal side, it's recognize that gap as well. Don't necessarily expect it to come from the organization. Most people have some time allocated for training and development. I think a lot of technical CISOs will gravitate towards another technical course, another technical qualification. But go and look at business leadership courses. There are many excellent courses out there, executive leadership courses. And I think they'd probably be more valuable for the business as a whole if some of these CISOs went on those courses and got some of that exposure and experience.
That's a great suggestion. And I think at the core of that, it's recognizing that your role is different.
Yeah.
That it's not just a step change on the technical side of you were managing a division or a department or a specific set of assets, and now you're doing it for the whole company. It's that you are really managing risk for the whole company, and you have to be able to communicate what that risk is. And so how are you going to make that step change in everything that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. And you can be mentored externally, you can be mentored internally with organizations, depending on its size. So the sooner you can get some of that insight, the sooner you can start developing is probably the way that I put it. I do see in previous roles, I've been asked to assess CISOs' performances, and it's interesting how many new CISOs, if I could categorize them like that, will go into a board meeting expecting that to be the place where lots of discussion happens and agreement happens, where I would argue that your experienced executive has made sure that consensus has been reached outside of that meeting. I'm not devaluing what discussion needs to happen in a board meeting, but if you go in with new information, expecting it all to happen in the board meeting, I think you're in for a lively experience. But I think that's just one of the things I see. There's kind of naivety, if you like, that you haven't properly understood your stakeholders. You haven't got your allies to your point and your cause, your chance of success. And your chance of success in the meeting is reduced. But the thing that I always see is probably the point that the CISO is making is right. It's sometimes I see good initiatives just don't work because the delivery was wrong. The facts of it were correct, but it's all about how you influence people and move people along with that journey, that articulation of risk.
Yeah, absolutely. As sitting on that side of the board, I've seen many of these conversations go astray because there isn't clarity and there hasn't been the groundwork laid for the conversation, right? Really understanding what background and pre-reads do I need to be providing so that everybody has had time to think about the challenges we face. And then what's the specific decision, if it's a decision that I'm trying to drive in that meeting? And do I have allies, people who I have had this conversation with before, who will chime in and help direct that conversation? So it's not just me directing the whole conversation. Absolutely a skill that you want your CISO to learn, to hone, so that they can have better conversations.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And if we both reflect on our board experiences, can you imagine a CRO, a CIO, a CMO, a CFO that hasn't done that,
Right.
that we still consider successful? So I think that's the standard that some CISOs have to operate at. You're talking about a experience gap of decades in terms of having that exposure and understanding of how to influence. and formulate your argument.
And so it seems like that's the kind of thing that if you were a CISO, a mentor plays a huge role in being able to help you to make that transition, to understand the steps that you might need to take to be a better influencer and to engage the departments, the divisions, the executives, and the board within your organization more effectively to drive the outcomes that you need. What role have mentors played in your career?
Probably a couple of key stages. One, actually, when I pivoted into security, and it gave me that insight to think about managing people, not technology. And that's across the organization, both in terms of how you influence employees, but very much more the focus was upward management. To be successful, you need to manage people, which is where I coined the impact through influence sort of term, which is one of the themes that I put into my mentorships. So that was a pivotal piece. And another one was with an external person. It was more, it put in a way of thinking, not a way of doing, but put in a way of thinking. And it was that just that focus on what you need to do is think in a different way. And then what you do will follow. How you behave, how you execute things will follow. But get yourself in that sort of stage where you're thinking differently. And I try as hard as I can to reproduce the influence that mentor had on me and shape people's thinking. Because if you do that, it's lifelong, as opposed to something that can seem task-oriented or a particular project you need it. But if you genuinely influence the way people think, then you've got a substantial change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that, as I reflect on things mentors have shared with me over the years, is as you move up in an organization, it is about a couple things. One, how you scale through others, right? How are you actually going to delegate and define things that need to be done, not just to your team, like this is throughout the organization and even to the leadership of what their accountabilities are. And then secondly, how do you move from having a conversation about what you know or what the information you want to share to what you need someone else to know or where you want them to engage or the action you want them to take?
Oh, absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. And I think the maturity piece is if you've got to the point where you're genuinely understanding business strategy, business opportunities, and business risks, you've, as the CISO, have got a much better chance of pre-prioritizing the security issues you're talking about. Because it's very easy to come to that group and say, this is terrible, we need to fix this. This is the number one priority for the organization, where actually it might not be. I'm not downplaying that there are security risks, obviously, but if you've got that insight into what the business is really doing, how it lives and breathes, what are the things that will make or break the business, you can help do that sort of assessment of where your security risk really should sit. And I just think that also is a fundamental piece to credibility, that if you're coming and saying, this is an issue, this is where I think it sits, we should do something about it, but potentially these are other priorities, I think you're going to get much more acceptance as opposed to the sort of chicken little variants that you might get with less experienced CISOs.
Absolutely. So you've done a lot of mentorship, I think, through the years for helping other CISOs to develop along these lines. So what are some of the things that you focus on? You've talked about impact and influence. You've talked about the way that you communicate. What are some of the other things that you help them think about? Can you share that a little bit more about those two things?
Yeah, I think probably the key thing is understanding the business objectives through the people that are delivering them. So that ties in two bits. So strategically, you understand where the business is trying to go, but also you then have a view of who are the key stakeholders in driving the business that way. And it's striking up the relationship with those stakeholders so you're able to position potential security issues, be risks or opportunities, in the context of what that person's focused on. I think that context and personal attachment that you get by properly understanding your key stakeholders is one of the most transformational things that I've seen. Yes, boards, I'm sure you've been subjected to this from time to time, go through sort of security education programs. Yeah, they have some impact. Often it's a change of CISO, but I think if you're really understanding what that CFO has to look at, what that CMO has to look at, and you're talking to them about risks to their objectives, you're just talking at a different level.
Yeah.
And your ability to influence and interact has just gone to, as I say, a completely different level.
Yeah, absolutely. It's what we call WIFM, right? It's what's in it for me,
Yep.
making sure that you understand what's in it for the person you're talking to and why this matters to them and what are the objectives that they're focused on that this will either help or detract from if you don't take action. So that's great mentorship and helping them to really move from being very tactical to thinking much more strategically. What are some other pointers on how to help a leader who's really spent their career being very technical and, really attacking tactical objectives, move into that strategic realm and manage across the organization at that strategic level?
I think one of the key pieces there is going to be making the space and time to do that change. And one of the things that I ask my mentees is, what would you need to be able to let somebody else manage this for you? So that you go through and say, how much time do you spend managing this yourself? Okay, let's say it's 4 hours a week or something. What would you need to be able to spend 25 minutes on that a week? To really challenge them in that sort of understanding of what's possible. Because sometimes I think there's a little bit of imposter syndrome happens, and there's a real sort of concern that, no, I must be doing all this. I'm here because I manage all of these things myself. No, I think probably you've been put into a position because people see potential and benefit. So I think that focus on understanding what you can go in a very structured and managed way is critical, because that's where you get the space and time. Unfortunately, I've seen CISOs overcommit to the strategic side and they've never let go on the tactical, and they just themselves because they haven't been able to commit the time or be consistent with the strategic engagements.
Yeah, absolutely. Really looking at the organization and saying, are there elements of what I'm managing today that someone else can do better? Either someone within my organization can do just as well as
Mhm.
I can, or there's a partnership, a third party that I can bring in that can oversee this, can do this as well as I did or could, and even better. And then I can step up a level and do
Yep.
things on a more strategic level and really engage with the organization at looking across the risks and looking across the business and spending the time to really understand what business objectives we have and how we're focusing on them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's probably my experience, the most consistently underestimated change is to make that elevation up, be involved in those discussions. To be credible and consistent, you need lots of time. And yeah, I think if you come from an operational background, you're potentially tuned to noise management as opposed to time management, which is where, again, looking at different groups that can support you, internal groups or external parties, there are lots of good security people out there, but the one caution I'd have is you're only free if you're happy to be free. So it's really got to be a partner, be it internal or external, that you're confident enough in that you've taken your 4 hours down to 25 minutes. Because if it's 4 hours has gone to 3 hours, you haven't freed yourself up, and you're probably spending a lot of money on behalf of your organization as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what? I think we're probably out of time, but I really appreciate you sharing your background and your experience. And I think that this will really help a lot of the upcoming CISOs to define their charter and identify the steps that they may need to take to really look across the organization. And then hopefully also look at what are some of those third party organizations and resources that can help them offload some of the more tactical work.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thanks for your discussion and input. It's been fantastic.
Gavriella, Gareth, thank you so much for the discussion today. I thought you hit on a lot of really key themes that are relevant for upcoming IT and security leaders, and even upcoming leaders across all dimensions. I think a lot of the lessons that you talked about are relevant across disciplines. So thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for those of you at home or on the train, in the car, on your treadmill for tuning in to Defend Your Time, the podcast where we help you get stronger security, better value, and fewer headaches out of your Microsoft security investments. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.